And this is the Holy Gospel according to John, the 9th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." And this is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So as I look out among you, I see there's at least one child over there. So I want to ask all of you, and especially those of you with a child over there, there is a certain stage that I think all young children go through that can wear a parent out with answering. It's called the why stage. Any instruction, any command, any information given will result in the child looking up innocently and asking, why? And since coming up for explanations of why the sky is blue or why it isn't a good idea for 3-year-olds to drive cars is rarely a satisfying answer, the whys can pile up endlessly until the parents are driven absolutely crazy. Anybody experience that? I'll bet you have. And it can get worse when the child realizes that the parent is annoyed or has difficulty coming up with answers, and now the endless whys have become a game of guess what? Stump the parent. But doctors and child psychologists tell us that the reason children ask why questions rarely has to do with a desire for cause and effect scientific answers to their questions. The children are just curious and interested in something. And cause and effect rational thinking is not yet a skill that they have, nor is it a need that requires filling. We as adults most likely misrespond to the child's why questions because we are very interested or perhaps even obsessed with knowing why things happen and who is responsible and what can be done about it. We adults are consumed with wanting to understand cause and effect because we want to know how to prevent, change, or control the things that happen in our lives. We want to know why so we can affect the what and the how. Now, in our gospel passage today, you may have noticed there are a whole lot of questions. That's one of the reasons I had you sit down. Questions that the disciples have for Jesus. Questions the residents of Jerusalem have about this miracle. Questions that the religious teachers, the Pharisees, have. Jesus' disciples, well, they want to know why the man was born blind. Others want to know why this man was cured. Who did this healing? How did this person heal, and when did he do it? What is to be believed about this healer that did something that was thought impossible? Who's to be trusted about religious matters? There's the big one. The Pharisees or this unknown healer? In Jesus' time, blindness was thought to be caused by a lack of the inner fire of light that would shine out of our eyes and cause us to see. Kind of reminds me of a Star Trek episode in a way. They thought blindness was a lack of fire in the eyes to allow you to eliminate your surroundings. And though occasionally folk healers could restore the sight of someone who had temporarily lost that inner fire and couldn't see, it was thought nearly impossible to heal someone who had been born blind. They also thought in those days that sickness and disease all came from someone sinning or somehow angering God. So if a baby was born with a medical problem, well, it couldn't have been the newborn that had sinned. So it must be his parents, because someone had to have done something wrong in order for this person to have a medical disability. You see how the thinking goes? So our story starts with the disciples noticing this beggar who must have been a regular on the Jerusalem streets and unknown for having been born blind. No, let me try that again. He was known for being born blind. Everybody knew who he was. And so they ask, who sinned? Was it this guy? His parents? Who sinned that he was born this way? Now, Jesus tells him the correct answer, that neither this person nor his parents were responsible for his being born blind. And here's where I like better my translation of this passage than the one that I read to you. I'm going to let you hear the difference. Give me a second here. Okay, so the passage that I read said, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind. Get this. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. There's another way you can parse that sentence, and I'm going to do it. He was born blind, period. Full stop. But in order that God's works might be revealed in him, the blind man, Jesus and his disciples must do the work of the Father who sent him while it is still day. Do you see the difference? It's not that he was born blind so that God could somehow be glorified. No, he was born blind, period. No further explanation needed. But in order for God's glory to be revealed, we must do the work while it is still day. Do you see that's a big difference? Because Jesus is the light of the world, he can even cure someone who has never had the light of eyesight in their eyes. And he's eager to do it while it is still day. So, Jesus mixes his spittle with the dust of the ground to make a muddy paste and puts that on the blind man's eyes, telling him to go and wash in the holy waters of the pool of Siloam. Now, saliva was frequently used as a folk remedy for eye problems, so it's not as yucky sounding as we might hear it. And Jesus' command to go and wash in the pool where water was drawn for holy festivals, well, that made sense too. It's holy water. Even if these normal actions would not normally cure someone born blind. If Jesus tells you to do it, though, it's going to work. And if this were all that there were to the story, we would have a normal Jesus healing tale, like we've heard before. But did you notice most of this story is not about the healing? It's not so much about Jesus being the light of the world and bringing light back to the eyes that had been dark from birth. That's not the bulk of the story. Most of this story is caught up in all the questions about disease and healing and the power of healers, and especially about Jesus' ability to heal. Questions. This blind man had been begging for some time in Jerusalem, and when he comes back from washing with his eyesight restored, well, it causes a bit of a stir and questions about it. Are you really the same blind man who used to sit here and beg? How'd you get your sight back? And who was this man who performed this miracle? And where is this Jesus? And who is he? So many questions. Now, Jesus himself had become fairly well known by this time, both for his powerful and radical teaching and for the miracles of healings that he'd done. And by this time, the religious authorities were getting a bit nervous about Jesus and his teachings, so they come on the scene and they immediately start investigating. And what do? They question the man who is born blind. It almost gets to be ridiculous the way they're questioning him. You see, Jesus, once again, what did he do? He committed the terrible blunder of healing someone on the Sabbath, when devout Jewish people were not supposed to be doing any work. That's why that point is in the story. The Pharisees are convinced that Jesus couldn't be operating by God's power because he obviously broke the laws about the Sabbath by healing the blind man. But then if Jesus didn't do it by God's power, then by what power did he heal? That must have made him mighty uncomfortable. So they start to question about whether a miracle really did happen. Maybe it was all a sham, a flim-flam scam. So they question the parents about their son. Was he truly born blind? They question the healed, formerly blind man again. He doesn't know how to answer all the questions about Jesus. And he thinks that Jesus is a prophet or a messenger from God to be able to have done this. He's getting there in his understanding. He can't quite bring himself to say that he thinks Jesus must be some sinner and wrong for giving him back his sight. I mean, would you? So he says the only thing he can. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. And that gets to the heart of the matter. Once he was blind, and now he can see. Everyone else in the story, except for Jesus and the blind man, are all wrapped up in why things happen, and who was to blame, and how this healing occurred, and under whose power and authority, and who is worthy, and who is a sinner. But Jesus is only concerned with healing people and bringing light while there is still a chance. And the blind man is only concerned with thanking and praising the one who came from God and gave him his sight. It's that simple. Jesus tells his disciples that they should also quit worrying about all the hows and whys and wherefores and who did it. And instead, just do God's work of healing and spreading light while there is still daylight to work. And when a child asks the why questions, the experts say that these kids are not actually looking for explanations in terms of cause and effect or science or anything analytical like that. A child who asks why is curious or interested about something and wants to share that curiosity with you. The child is inviting us to talk to them about it and tell them stories about what they're interested in. Experts recommend that sometimes the best thing that you can say when a child says why is, well, why do you think? Or something similar. It could spark a neat conversation. For example, if they ask why the sky is blue, don't start talking about the lengths of light waves and how they are absorbed by the atmosphere. Talk about how the sky can be pink in the morning or gold at sunset or black at night. Talk to them and engage them. Now, in the story of the healing of this formerly blind man, the man was like the child, interested in just accepting Jesus for who Jesus tells him he is. But the religious authorities can't bring themselves to accept the miracle just for what it is. Instead, they question where Jesus gets his power and whether Jesus is sinful. They question whether the blind man is also sinful and to blame, and if his parents are a part of this whole plot. And even Jesus' disciples get caught up in the blame game of trying to figure out who is responsible for the evils of the world. But Jesus, he's only concerned about the business of healing. And the blind man is only concerned about enjoying his new eyesight and praising the one who helped him. We often can see God working most clearly in the dark times of our lives, when we need healing and when we quit worrying about figuring out and just let God be God. Sometimes we can really trouble ourselves with trying to figure out the whys. But when we feel God's presence with us in our sickness, or know that God has carried us through a rough patch, or see that God has led us to new things in ways that we never could have found for ourselves otherwise, it's in those moments that the questions fall away. You're only left with feeling that God is somehow working in your life. In the cross, Jesus took on all of our brokenness, all of our sinfulness, all of our pain and suffering. He shouldered everything that ruins our lives and robs us of the joy of life. And he took it all down into hell, literally. Jesus brought God's life into death. He brings God's light into darkness. Jesus is God's life found in the worst pain and suffering that we can imagine. And when we get to those moments in the deepest pit of human experience, we have been promised that not only has Jesus been there, but that he is there with us. It's not like he left a message, Jesus was here to comfort us. No, it's a lot more than that. We are promised that Jesus is there with us in the depths, and he will bring his light and life even into death. Folks, we are a resurrection people with a message of life from death. We are a people of light with a promise of beams of light shining in the midst of pain and suffering. We are charged with spreading that light and healing while the daylight of Christ is with us. Now, there are two ways to respond to the dark side of life that may confront us. We can play the blame game, getting stuck in trying to understand what is often beyond our understanding. We can wrestle with questions and doubts and worries, and that's okay for a little while. Or we can realize that in darkness, we are promised light. In the depths of despair, we are promised God's presence with us. So we need to respond as little children of God our Father. We need to let our why be not a request for causes and responsibilities, but let our why be an invitation for God to come and just speak life to us. After the Pharisees throw out the now cured blind man, after they throw him out of the synagogue and they make him a religious outcast, Jesus finds him and asks him if he hopes in the coming of the Son of Man, the Messiah. And the man asks, "Who is he, sir, so that I can believe in him?" And of course, Jesus says, "I am he." And the man worships Jesus. Friends, we don't have to go looking for Jesus in our troubles. In our darkness, Jesus himself comes to us and reveals himself to us. The world will always be wrapped up in looking for understandings and casting blame and trying to control the uncontrollable. But we are promised Jesus, the one who comes into our deepest darkness and says, "Here I am. I am the one you've been looking for. I've come to heal you and bring you light. I've come so you no longer need to ask why. Now go and wash and find healing for your soul." Amen. And we are called to live in that light, to share that light that we have received from Christ. So now I invite you, please stand as you're able. Join with me in singing, "We Are Called."